Hi everyone and welcome to TLDR Week 10 Physical Security. The learning outcomes for the week, we are going to talk a little bit about code integrity and scope, whitelisting and blacklisting. We're going to talk about the concept of secure boot and secure loading. We're going to talk about why it's dangerous to plug peripherals into devices. We're going to talk about physical attacks and talk about attacks on non-PC hardware. So physical security is when we're talking about access to the actual physical machine or physical access to the company or the campus. Now, this is actually something that if you look up anything with pen testers, you'll sometimes see that they will do recon and try to walk right in. Now, with physical security, if you're trying to, let's say, access a server virtually, it can sometimes be a little bit more work. You have more layers that you have to get through. When you have physical access to a server, that actually bypasses a lot of these things, and a lot of the issues that you would have with remote access you no longer have with physical access. So if we're talking about physical access to a server or physical access to a computer, if you have physical access to these machines, there's really not that much that can be done to leave you out. So this is something that is a concern for a lot of companies, but they don't necessarily pay that much attention to it. Now, you will see some companies, especially in healthcare, high tech, government third party type of R&D, they will have some physical security that they worry about, such as gates, checkpoints, cards, you have to be buzzed up, elevators that only work if you scan your ID, things like that. Now, when we talk about physical security, we actually have to worry about the servers, whether it's server rooms, server racks. We have to think about things like network cables. So if you look at this image, this is actually called a throwing star LAN tap. And what this does is it gives you the ability to see the information that's being sent over network cables. Other things that will sometimes be overlooked when we talk about security and physical security is data storage and backups. So if you have all of your very important customer data, credit card records, payroll accounts, things like that, you're probably going to have a backup of these. Those backups are probably going to be physically saved somewhere, whether it's hard drives or tape or whatever. If somebody can walk off with one of these, they've just walked off with all of your data. Yes, it's a backup. No, it might not be the most current, but they have still walked off with all of your data. So it's something that you do need to be wary of and pay attention to. One of the things that happens in information security is there's actually a community of people that participate in LockSport. Now, normally I would do a LockSport demo and I actually have some clear locks that you can use in class. However, that's not something that we can do remotely. So what I will say is if you are a Northern Essex student and you would like to try LockSport, once the pandemic is over and we can all safely be on campus, come find me and I will happily show you and you can try it out. If you want to spend a little bit of cash, there's actually clear locks that you can buy almost anywhere for 10 to 15 bucks and start playing with it. The TED the Tools Guide to LockSport is a relatively good one. Now, when we talk about LockSport, there is, of course, the semi-practical picking a lock to get physical access. I do, however, say this as semi-practical because while it is true that you might have a physical lock, it's unlikely to be a simplistic one, and now it's more likely to be an electronic one. You can actually see some very interesting demos of LockSport with the lock-picking lawyer on YouTube if you're interested. When we talk about being able to protect systems, what we want to do is think about the different pieces of the system that need to be protected. Now, operating systems need to be protected. We want to have updates and patches. One of the issues that we can have with these updates and patches, if we have a malicious update that we have stored somewhere and we can trick users into installing this malicious update, we can potentially get full access to their systems. What some companies have started doing is doing a secure boot or locking the BIOS so that you actually have to have a password to be able to change things like, for example, the boot order if it's a machine that has that, or it won't allow you to do things like boot from USB. That's actually a security measure because if you have something like, say, Linux on a thumb drive and you can boot into that, you actually bypass all of the Windows security controls. So if, for example, you have a Windows computer that you've password protected, but you give somebody physical access to that computer, if you have a USB with Linux on it, you can plug it in, boot into that USB, and then all of the password protection that you've set up with Windows is completely ignored because you're never actually starting Windows. The only thing that would be protected is if you had an encrypted file or you encrypted the whole hard drive, which not as many people do. Now, when we're talking about protecting systems, we also have to think about the user aspect. You have to convince your users to update, and you have to update operating systems as well as applications. It's important to make sure that you have what's called signed updates. You want to make sure that any updates and patches that are coming into any of your systems are legitimate from the actual legitimate people that create them. You don't want to install fakes here. Now, whitelisting and blacklisting. I have mentioned this before, but it is worth mentioning it again that especially with all of the conversations happening at this point in time in regards to race, racism, and being anti-racist, whitelisting and blacklisting, that particular language is actually considered racist language. However, in the technology community and certainly in the information security community, as of summer 2020, this hasn't changed and this language is still being used, so it's important that you know what these terms mean. Whitelist means you are only allowed to go places or use these certain applications. Blacklist means this is the set of applications you're forbidden from using. For example, if you use a Chromebook, they are going to have a whitelist for applications because they only have so many applications within the App Store. Same with your phones. If you have a phone, the applications that you are downloading are likely going to be from the App Store, from the manufacturer. However, you could also have a blacklist. This might be an example of websites. If you are working somewhere, they are probably going to say you can go to any websites except maybe these half dozen or dozen. And they might do things like block some sites such as Facebook or Pinterest or things, unless that's part of your job. Some jobs will block more, some jobs will block less, and some jobs will block based on the job that you have. For example, if you do PR, you actually do need to access your social media. But if you're doing, for example, help desk, you might not need to access that. When we have different devices, we have what's called peripherals. Peripherals are things that we can plug into our computer. These can also actually be a vulnerability. If we have a peripheral such as a wireless mouse or a wireless keyboard or a printer, copier, fax machine, USB, all of these are ways that viruses can actually be carried into your system. A lot of companies have actually started forbidding people from bringing peripherals into the company. They will actually not allow USBs to be used. They will not allow external mice or keyboards to be used, and they'll actually have a set of devices that will come from in-house, and those are the only ones you're allowed to use. Now, a second issue that goes with peripheral threats is actually after the life cycle of the peripheral, then what happens? Let's say, for example, a copier. Most businesses have a copy machine somewhere. However, copy machines at this particular time are basically small computers. Most of them have chips, most of them have Wi-Fi, most of them have logins and passwords, most of them are attached to networks, most of them are able to receive messages, some can even receive emails. And so those copy machines are basically a funny shaped computer. If you're going to get rid of your copy machine, you have to think about what's happening with all of the data in your funny shaped computer. Are you wiping it? Are you encrypting it? Are you pulling those chips out? There was actually several years ago an issue with a hospital where they got rid of all of their copy machines, but they didn't wipe any of them. So the place that they sold them to, sort of en masse, they were actually able to pull up all of these medical files, HIPAA records, and the whole thing because nobody thought to wipe them. It didn't occur to people that wiping copy machines is part of what you do when you give the machine away. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to not just the use, but also the after use. When we talk about threats and countermeasures, the threat is the thing that we're worried about. The countermeasure is how we protect against the thing that we're worried about. So let's say, for example, I am worried about a mobile device being lost. I am head of IT of a company. I've handed out mobile devices to the entire IT team, and I'm worried that these devices are going to be lost as people are going about their business. My countermeasure is I'm going to have all of the devices that I hand out done with a full distinct encryption. They are all going to have locators, and if they get lost, I have remote root access so that I can basically nuke them and make them blank. So there's different ways that we can do that. That's just an example, but you want to think about, if we're talking about security, what is the thing that I am worried about? What is the countermeasure to the thing that I am worried about? IoT basically opens up a brand new whole can of worms, anything related to security. There's many things now that are internet connected that people are adding to their homes, and they aren't necessarily paying attention to security, the companies or the people. The example that I always use is a vending machine. Let's say you have a vending machine at your very expensive R&D company. That vending machine likely has a computer in it. That computer probably has Wi-Fi. It might even be using your Wi-Fi, which means you now have a foreign device on your network and no idea of what the security controls are. Now, the company might be thinking, gee, isn't this convenient? I have my vending machine and it can send me a message when I'm out of chips. But you do still have to worry about the fact that your vending machine literally has the ability to go on the internet and communicate with people, which means other people have the ability to communicate with your vending machine. Now, a vending machine, it's not like we're talking about it's going to get up and start, shooting soda at people, but it is still connected to your network. So if you have, for example, a vending machine connected to the internet and people put malware on there, or they put something on there that makes it look like a free hotspot, you could still have people connect. It could be used as a way to exfiltrate data, and it's something that a lot of people aren't necessarily going to think of as a threat. I mean, if you go and you look at the smart devices that are in your home, other people's homes, or companies, you're probably going to be surprised at the amount of stuff that's there. We're talking about vending machines, we're talking about doorbells, Wi-Fi cams, light bulbs. Sort of all of these things are smart home devices that are getting put on networks without the same levels of protection that we would have had before. Please let me know if you have any questions.